It says guilt. To me, that says guilt, because I offered to give it as. process information.
I don't have one. Julia.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for making it out on a rainy Monday morning. Just doing introductions, or we wanna? Yeah. All right, I'm Michelle Duggan, I'm Miles County Utility Co-Chair.
Tino Provenzano. I'm with Mosaic Ramsey Industry Co-Chair. Morning, everybody.
Ray Pribble with ESA.
Will Llewellyn with Sound Agriculture.
Hi, I'm Isabella Spratt. I'm with Environmental.
Ryan McMillan, environmental scientist, City of Largo.
Drew Boylston, Mills County Utilities. Hi, I'm Michael Sharon. I'm with Manatee County Natural Resources Department. Sam Deloney with Alderman.
Herb Donica with Piney Point.
Aaron DeBacco, Kendra Morgan.
Ilya Balcom, Duke Energy.
Stacey Dave, Nellis County Environmental Manager.
Jeff Hilton, City of Tampa.
Patrick Murphy, Plant City.
John Allen Stock, Plant City.
Troy Green, Hillsborough County Environmental Services.
Heather Maggio with the city of Tampa.
Jan McLean, Gray Robinson, representing the estuary program.
Mark Stack, Estuary Program.
Hi, I'm Brooke, Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Did you have a few folks online? Would you like me to read out their names? Should I let them introduce themselves too? Yeah, great.
Fine.
I'll call your names for those online. If you can unmute and introduce yourself. Julie? Shit. Jeff Greenwell?
I can't find my mute. Oh, yeah. Jeff Greenwell, Hillsborough County.
Roger Johansson.
We got Roger, Karen Crab Nelson,
Hi, Karen Crab Nelson, Office of Agricultural Water Policy, Florida Department of Agriculture, Consumer Services.
Julie Vogel, Ming Lee,
Yeah, Ming Lee from University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science.
Nicole Poyo,
Hi, yes, Nicole Polio from RES for FDOT District 7.
Adam Wood,
Hi, Adam Wood with Hillsborough County Public Utilities.
Brandon Johnson,
Brandon Johnson with Stantec.
Heather Bryan, Caitlin Sutton,
Hi, I'm Caitlin Sutton. I'm with the Water Quality Standards Program at FDEP.
Kevin Miller,
Kevin Miller, City of Largo.
Luke Mulford,
Hillsborough County Water Resources Division Department.
Molly Kleinpeter,
Molly Kleinpeter, City of Lakeland Water Utilities.
Rachel Biddick,
Good morning, Rachel Visek with RES here on behalf of DOT District 7.
Jeff Hallis, Raymond Rodriguez,
High school science teacher. Local.
Ryan Isaac,
Brian Resnick, environmental management, Pinellas County.
Simon Boland,
Simon Bolin, Hillsborough County Extension.
Tanya McMillan, think that's everyone I have online.
Great, thank you so much. I guess we can just jump right into it. Ed, with the simulated capacity assessment.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Ed Schroed, Director of Tampa Bay Estuary Program. As we've gone through the discussions with the full consortium, we're bringing this back to the group in relation to potential changes to the whole Tampa Bay American nutrient criteria. So this has been an ongoing discussion that has emanated from some of the capacity work that we have been doing for the better part of a year and a half now through contractor Stantec. There's been a couple of recommendations made through some of that work on the heels of us turning in the 2022 reasonable terms update and indicating to the department that we were exceeding our chlorovoid conditions for 3 straight years, and there's sort of a follow-up to maintain reasonable assurance in this cycle. So don't want to repeat too much, but to give you guys like a little bit of history again, we're currently at this NMC Action 3 point in the process. Basically, did not meet chlorovoid conditions in 3 straight years during the last RA cycle, but we were meeting the total nitrogen delivery ratio that has been established. Those disconnects warranted us to start developing a new estimative capacity study for the whole Tampa Bay segment and deliver some of those results and recommendations back to the consortium for decisions and path forward to better manage that system. And that, like I said, has been a lot of the work that for the better part of a year and a half that we've been pursuing with Stantec support. And ultimately, that primary recommendation that came out of their Task 2 report was moving in the direction of the federally recognized TMDL, using that as sort of the management target moving forward for nutrient loads. The empirical and mechanistic modeling evidence that they developed are outlined in a couple of different reports. They're all linked through the estuary programs, nitrogen management consortium pages, as well as our tech report pages and library. But ultimately, as I mentioned, the recommendation was as we move closer to that 486 total nitrogen load in the whole Tampa Bay segment, there appeared to be a higher likelihood of us meeting that chlorovoid standard more consistently in the future. And that was the initial recommendation and decision memo that we crafted and brought to the full consortium back in October. We had another conversation about it after we met individually with all entities represented in the whole Tampa Bay segment and heard both positives and concerns about moving that direction from all the entities represented in old Tampa Bay. And at the April meeting, it was sort of a decision that we would bring this information to our management and policy board of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, solicit more feedback from those folks, and then report back to the whole Tampa Bay working group to kind of formalize what that decision memo should contain moving forward. So we've done that work. We presented this information at our management board meeting in early May. And as I mentioned, there's pretty consistent support for this process to continue to try to maintain reasonable assurance in this cooperative fashion through the Nitrogen Management Consortium. But there's still, I think, some concerns about, the fiscal implications of if we move this direction of setting an absolute load as the new compliance assessment benchmark for that base segment move forward. Mostly from the sides of those entities that have a % load reduction or a hydrologically normalized and assessed load, our assessed load in that base segment. Those namely, stormwater and MS4 permittees within the base segment that have these concerns about not using that scaled hydrologic normalization process moving forward. So again, those were kind of expressed during our management board meeting. A week later, we also brought it to our policy board. Again, some of the same fiscal and legal implications of setting this new absolute load. The numeric nutrient criteria was expressed. But again, in general, this collaborative approach that we've been on, working together towards managing that base segment more cooperatively in the future towards this new target, it was also seen as, something that's needed. think many of our management policy board members expressed that they know, there's issues in Old Tampa Bay and something different needs to be done. What that something different is I think is still under debate and it's for the conversation. And that really shaped, sort of what came out of the Old Tampa Bay Working Group meeting that happened after those management policy board meetings. We changed significantly the nature of the decision memo rather than framing it as a recommendation of the consortium. It's now a series of 7 questions that we're specifically looking to garner feedback from the department and EPA on. These questions are centered around how, in fact, if we move to this absolute load as the benchmark, how would that be assessed, both at the base segment level, but also individually down to the NT level and the allocations that have been already expressed in that base segment. So as I mentioned, we pretty significantly modified the decision memo to reflect those series of questions that we want to pose to both the department and EPA to get their feedback so that we can craft a path forward with the full consortium now in this reasonable terms update. We're not making any recommendations at this point. We've also asked our legal counsel, Jan McLean, in the back to go through what the decision memo is asking of the department relative to the existing final orders, QBL that have been established in that base segment. And we could have sort of conversation on that if we needed to. I think at this point, I feel like we've kind of moved past sort of any sort of formal recommendation. We're just asking questions of the department. And if the consortium is comfortable forwarding on this decision memo at this point, that's my hope is that we could ask these questions and get some feedback so we are all moving forward on the same page. We have an understanding of what's best for that base segment. I'll pause there. I don't know if you had any particular questions on sort of what led up to this point, where we're at, and having to bring a decision memo as well. It's kind of move through each one of those questions if you wanted more time to kind of think about it. But we have received comments from the Old Tampa Bay Working Group and have integrated that into the full the spirit of this decision memo now. I'll stop there. Any questions? Thoughts, understanding where we're at. I see you got a question, Heather? Sure. Anyone online have any questions about sort of the nature of the decision memo and how it's been modified since we last met in April?
I'd like to make a motion for the consortium to approve the decision memo as revised and presented here today to the group.
Second? You have a second?
Second, Daniel Simpson, Oldsmar.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions here or online? I think we have a passed motion.
I think so. That was quicker than I was expecting.
Yeah, and if I could, I just want to thank everybody for taking a look at this and Jan for your help in kind of polishing this up. I think this is much better than where we started and hopefully is aligned with the smaller group meeting that we had a few weeks ago to address everybody's concerns. So thank you everybody for your input on this.
Well, I think we're almost pretty much done. I think the next couple of things are going to be fairly quick, but on the heels of the task 2 report and its recommendation, there has been work by the contractor to develop a task 3 report. We've been asking folks to comment on that report, which is linked in the agenda, by June 23rd, next week. So please provide any comments on that document. If you haven't taken a glance at that document, it's basically looking at if we're moving in this direction of establishing an absolute load, what projects, are potentially out there that we could implement to help us meet that absolute load condition in the future. There's one sort of, conversation surrounding implementation of Senate Bill 64 for the remaining wastewater treatment plants in that base segment. And that will get us, fairly close to a target to bring down that average more consistently to that 486 number. By an amount, maybe about like 50% of what might be needed in the future. Also, that task report looked at another management intervention to remove or look at ways we could utilize Lake Tarpon water as a beneficial water supply source in the future, as one potential to remove that loading into the old Tampa Bay segment. If those two projects were implemented in full, I think we were estimating that we'll more than meet sort of that new absolute loading target more consistently on a 5-year rolling average basis. And then there's all these other projects that could be implemented through your guys' municipalities, through your CIP programs that we want to collect as part of the reasonable assurance update and our action plan database update. All that information again feeds into whether or not we're going to be more consistently meeting that absolute load target in the future. There's a couple of modeling scenarios in that task 3 report that kind of outline those different approaches to managing the space segment a little bit differently in the future. And then of course, when we get response back from the department based on the decision memo that you all pass, we'll have a sort of better idea of how that gets folded into the reasonable assurance plan to continue to maintain that determination by the department in the future.
I just want to highlight that, the message that we have received from members of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection staff is that this report information is what's really critical for them to accept us demonstrating reasonable assurance for Tampa Bay. So if you haven't taken a look at this report yet, I strongly encourage you to, because this is critical information. When the department reviewed the task 2 report, they were like, yeah, but we're really excited to see what's in this task 3 report. So if you want to know sort of where their head is at, what they're looking to see, this information right here, it's super important to get your feedback on it. So please take the time. We would really appreciate it.
And at the same time, the full consortium is reviewing that. We also have subject matter experts that we brought on to this project to also provide comments back. And then once we receive those comments from the full consortium, the contractor will be tasked with revising it to address those concerns.
That deadline doable for everyone? By comments by the 23rd. You need a different copy. Does anyone else have a hard time accessing the Google Drive? Need a copy. Just email me if you do.
So, yeah, I could give a segue into the next one. That's good. So yeah, as part of this current reasonable assurance plan, the 2022 to 2026 period, of which this encompasses, what we usually provide to the department is an estimate of loading from all major sources. Ray's group at ESA has been developing that information for us. We're hoping to get the loading information for this current period, this 2022 through at least 2024 period here shortly. I know Ray's been working tough. We're working hard to acquire that information from each one of the entities and make some of those estimates. So that information is coming, and we'll bleed into our current reasonable assurance reporting and compliance assessment. So far, as we've been reporting, Old Tampa Bay has been meeting its chlorophyll threshold. So there's not been a need to kind of drill down into the loadings over this RA cycle, just based on improved water quality conditions that we've seen. We think a lot of that is related to the lack of rainfall we had in 2022 and 2023. It's changing somewhat, maybe in 2024 with the hurricanes and into 2025. And we'll see where we land this year in terms of meeting those chlorophyll standards. But for the most part, we're in pretty good shape in terms of water quality supportive of continued seagrass recovery in the Bay segment. So I'll turn it over to Ray to kind of talk about what the loading information entail, as part of the regional.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick summary of. So, some of y'all already know, some, maybe unfamiliar, we really go split up the, source types in Tampa Bay, watershed into these, 7 different groups. And then when we do these loading, updates, requires a lot of communication to the different entities responsible for loading to the bay, especially with respect to domestic and industrial point sources. We're at the point now where we've got almost every little bit of data. We have one missing industrial point sources being worked on, will be delivered to us. And we have a couple of the fertilizer handling facilities, the material losses facilities we need to get information from. Other than that, we have all the information, not just to do, we originally scheduled to do the 22 through 23 first and the 24 by September. I think we get it all done here within the next maybe 2-3 weeks, if everything works well. So that's our shot of what we're doing. Yeah, this is just a status of exactly where we are. One of the hangups that we always have is getting the information from the National Atmospheric Deposition Program or the our atmospheric deposition air concentration sites, but we can make estimates for 24 preceding year data, so we can fill in these missing spots and then finish these things up. And like I said, early mid-July, I'll be pretty happy about it. We'll have all 3 years in the book. We can go back later and once we get the 24 atmospheric deposition data, make that slight revision, but that's where they stand. So actually, I want to give you all a pat on the back. It's been a lot easier this time around getting these domestic and industrial point source information provided to us, even though a lot of turnover. Actually, like people, so that's been and meet some new people and explain what does several times. So that's been pleasant. If somebody has any questions about this, you can ask me now, or something comes up in your head later on. I'm easy to contact. I think my information is probably all over the place, so get a hold of me and we right. Good.
Questions for Ray?
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
Our goal, as it always is to make these data available to you all through some of the reporting tools that Marcus has made available. And so hopefully y'all are familiar with those. And if you're not, hit Marcus up. He can kind of show you what he's developed to support your decision making.
We got one more item to talk about. This will probably engender some conversation, I would imagine, but we'll see. So
other bay segments, not just old Tampa Bay.
So I think some both online and in the room have participated in the department's BMAP updates meetings that were held late last year in 2024, and then a little bit in the beginning part of this year, 2025. So if you're not aware, the department was tasked with updating BMAPs throughout the state of Florida. And as part of that process, we have two large riverine BMAPs that have been in place pretty much since I believe the late 2000s. These BMAPs are centered around the Alphi River as well as the Manatee River. There was a series of TMDLs developed that led to the development of fecal coliform BMAPs. The department, in addressing some of these updates, are recognizing all the TMDLs that have been established. Some of those relate to nutrients and DO impairments in these systems. And the letter I provided to the department early this year is in relation to implementation of those BMAP updates. The concern I expressed, which is one that has been outlined by the consortium in the past, there's 2 specific decision memos that are referenced in the body of this letter that were developed back in 2008 when we were first talking about sort of the nexus of the reasonable assurance plan, individual weighted TMDLs, as well as these riverine BMAPs that were starting to be developed. And the question centered around, what is the nexus between the allocations developed with the reasonable assurance plan and these smaller spatially scaled water quality based assessments. And my comments to the department at the time of these updates is basically similar to what was expressed in 2008. We didn't see that there was any nexus with those documents as they were being updated with what is being done through this reasonable assurance process. So allocations that have been developed through the reasonable assurance process are recognized as being once implemented as part of these TMDLs with for individual WIBIDs, as well as the larger tributary BMAPs. And what I express is that there's a disconnect in terms of how those allocations were developed for those smaller scale spatial units, whereas the allocations don't necessarily apply because they've been developed for the Hillsborough Bay segment and not at those finer WIBID or riverine BMAPs scale. So we had a initial conversation with the department. We expressed, this concern to them again, and sort of the path forward that we offered was to kind of work that out with the department through the course of these nitrogen management consortium conversations and the reasonable assurance update. So we've had a standing invite to the department to present on the BMAP updates. They're not able to make this meeting and present on it, but we're hoping in August that they will come and kind of talk about what that means in terms of implementing recommendations from the BMAP and how that dovetails with any work done through this reasonable assurance update. And that's kind of where we left it with the department at this point. Again, just trying to resolve sort of difference in benchmarks that were established as part of those TMDLs for those individual WIBIDs and the larger reasonable assurance plan that's more applicable to the base segment in terms of nitrogen load reductions that were called for. I'll put it overtly out there, what's in those TMDLs call for anywhere from like 50 to 54% nitrogen load reductions to help those individual WIBIDs meet water quality standards related to nutrient impairments. And it's recognized that some of the riverine WIBIDs are still not meeting those standards. So that's what prompted my letter to the department of how do we address sort of those water quality impairments moving forward collectively while we're working on this reasonable assurance plan that addresses the larger base segment impairment. So that's where it's at. Hopefully we'll have the department come speak to this group at the August meeting. And then, we need to kind of decide as a body how best to move forward and whether or not, the path that's developed with that input from the department is sufficient for us and the consortium. Stop there. Anybody have any questions, want to dig in a little bit deeper? This is linked in the agenda packets, and as I mentioned, the prior decision memos that were developed by the consortium and the department's response are also highlighted within that letter. Questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to be clear, so the disconnect that you mentioned is a function of when it's not meeting their criteria versus what we're looking for in the RA, not the methodology by which those criteria were established within those individual limits.
I haven't expressed that. I know that is a standing concern by many entities with the development of those deals. I'm talking mainly with the disconnect that's already expressed in those documents that have already been approved. So whether or not like the lower L5 meets a 50% nitrogen load reduction from waste load allocations and load allocations, you can't use the reasonable occurrence sort of determinations to, assess that impairment in lower Tampa Bay or in the lower L5.
Do you see a path forward where it seems almost like, just looking at it at a high level, there's the potential for a duplication of efforts, or like you said, a disconnect where you're targeting a load reduction limited that may be potentially too myopic with respect to the RA plan, which is looking at the bay as well. So do you think there's an opportunity to fold those in lieu of a PMAP adding those to the RA plan, or is that not the intent?
Yeah, I mean, by nature of the drainage basin, and they're incorporated somewhat into the reasonable terms plan, but they're not specifically addressing the TMDLs that have been identified for those small movements. But yeah, how that all works out in the reasonable assurance update, I think that's, you know, where we need to have that conversation with the department. They are also under, I think, a deadline to get those BMAP updates done statewide by July 1st.
I think those documents that were linked in the agenda will be finalized by July 1. And, under the department understanding this concern, they'll probably come back and modify the BMAP for Alpha at least, which will have allocations, every indication they've given us. So to be informed about that process going forward, they revise it, I think will be important. And I think these have been the questions all along, is how does the new and improved BMAP process play with RA?
Or does it?
But Ed, I'm struck, what problem are you trying to fix? So my understanding is that the base segment allocations, and they are allocations now because they're in permits, that are in the RA document for Tampa Bay are being met consistently. So your concern is upstream in these stream WIBIDs,
Yeah,
maybe they're not being met.
yeah, so that allocation was specific to meet the chlorophyll standard in Hillsborough Bay. It wasn't necessarily to meet a DO or other nutrient impairment identified in those small WIBIDs. And how the department assesses sort of compliance with the reductions specified in those TMDL, you're just relying on the allocations that have been developed for the larger bay segment at this point.
Any comments or questions?
I just have more of a curiosity, but let's say we didn't take the reasonable assurance plan route. And DEP did end up doing a TMDL and BMAPs on all the bay-wide WIBIDs. How do you think how would that mesh with the tributary WIBIDs and the upper watershed WIBIDs? Like, how does DEP, how would they address that? Would it have been just one large BMAP for all these WIBIDs, including Tampa Bay, if there was no RA plan? Because that was the rationale, right? Was largely that, you know, you do an RA plan, therefore you do not have to deal with what sounds like we're dealing with the rivers in the waterways within the watershed.
Just a few.
Just a few, yeah. Just out of curiosity, like, how many are we talking about?
The other one is Hillsborough, which doesn't have nutrients added to it yet, so it's just these 3 for right now.
We're not dealing with like
Yeah, they're reading mass, but it's
Only,
like 10 to 12 individual TMDLs.
10 to 12.
That has been sort of the standing question going back when we were originally developing the regional assurance plan, specific allocations, how that meshes with those smaller units of assessment was still not clearly defined in those prior asks to the department, and we're just asking that again. How like we expressed, you know, the allocations that we developed are specific to Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay proper. They don't necessarily move up into the watershed and address TMDLs for small spatial scales. And that's the question we're asking, is what is the mechanism to make that access smooth forward? I think our original initial conversations with them indicate that we're going to use some common modeling tools. So the way we estimate loading for each of the major bay segments, we're probably communicating with that in BMAP areas. So at least that loading information is one-to-one in terms of you know, coming out with different baselines to assess compliance with those BMAPs moving forward. So that's the first conversation and feedback we've gotten from the department, and just ask them to kind of work through that process through the reasonable terms plan now.
And it's just a policy change that's been passed on by the legislature that's going to have regulatory implications for y'all, and it interfaces with the RA, so that's why we think it's important to get a meeting on the books so that we can give the department sufficient time with an invitation so they can come and kind of think through some of these things with us.
But DEP is gonna come to the August.
Well, we have to set a meeting date in August, and then I can formally provide a draft agenda and a formal invitation with the meeting date identified, and then they can tell us whether or not they can meet it.
So they're gonna finalize documents in July and then come and tell us what they did.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, the updates that we initially provided this comment letter on, like I said, there's not a clear nexus other than them stating that there's a reasonable insurance plan in place, and they've been comfortable referencing that in the BMAP updates. So if it stays like that, it's not gonna be resolved in the BMAP, but we're offering this venue to kind of work through that larger level of thought that Chris was expressing of how do we make all these things work together and not duplicate effort.
I will say, Tino, that like we've been working through this with them since we knew that these changes were coming. And I think they were under a tight deadline. And so they've been trying to meet the deadline. And while the ask has been out there, they haven't really had an answer for how they're gonna handle many of these things. So they wouldn't have even known what they could present here to have that conversation, unfortunately, until after the deadline for the adoption of the plan is there. That's why it's kind of, we're wanting to make sure folks are aware. And then we're doing the things that we need to do in order to get them in front of us, which is give them sufficient notice with a meeting date and a draft agenda so that they can come to us. But they know that they've been building, like, figuring out as they go.
They're really puzzled, confused about what this all means.
You should be confused. There's really not a dumb question here. This is confusing.
Well, my guess is that they're over allocated, I guess, in individual segments. And that's not lining up with what we see at the base segment level.
Yeah, if you think about the RA allocations, and I'll pick on Hillsborough County. If you think about Hillsborough County stormwater, that allocation is for portions of Bullfrog Creek, Alafaya, Palm River, Hillsborough River, the northwest side of the county. So that that allocation is not necessarily addressing the specific small within. But it'd be good to know like what portion of that allocation is attributed to the TMDL or BMAP process, and are we meeting at least that standard moving forward? That's what was said needed to be done to meet that TMDL in the past.
For the Manatee River, it's not clear that they're going to be moving towards allocations. They haven't decided yet, so it's really important to kind of be paying attention to it as it plays out and weighing in along the way.
Any other comments or concerns?
I was asking him what his priority number one TMDL is for Hillsborough County. It's not either of these rivers, so it's gonna be on the priority list, but
Alafaya is the only one that Hillsborough County is involved in for this BMAP process. So the Alafaya is the one that we're looking at.
but is it your number one or two or three?
Currently, no, but we need to do a reprioritization.
Right, the next
So,
permit.
Yeah, so we'll see where it lands, but right now we're focused on East Lake and Delaney Creek still.
Okay. So it's based on the individual priority list for the TMDL implementation. So it's not chosen as a number one or a number two. It's not addressed for another 5 years, right?
Well, we do have projects ongoing in the Alafaya Basin still. So it's not necessarily priority one or two. We have projects that we're focusing on other systems, but we're still doing work in the Alafaya, so I don't know.
Isn't the BMAP though supposed to be pre-TMDL? Like a wrap? Like the Alify, it has a TMDL?
There's multiple TMDLs for individual WIBIs within the L5 basin. The BMAP is post TMDL, is my understanding. They involve additional stakeholders that need to work together within that whole, however large it ends up being, to encompass those affected WIBIs, to then get the improvements that they're looking for. And I'm not certain, but I think the comment regarding the RA plan for the L5 specifically, did that only affect the title portion, the WIBID 1621G? I don't know if that's correct. I think that's correct. So
There's, I don't have a way to raise my hand, but I can speak to that question if you like.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, sorry, but I mean, and this was discussed, many years ago when we originally developed a reasonable assurance plan, and the answer is that's correct. This is a reasonable assurance plan for Hillsborough Bay. And it does not include necessarily addressing the TMDLs and the lack of achieving criteria in any of the water body, the WIBIDs upstream. So it was never intended to include that. And there was another question. I mean, the BMAPs are the result of a TMDL having been developed. And the BMAP is the methodology by which a management plan can be developed that's going to meet the impairment that's being addressed. So it's TMDL BMAP.
Yeah, the BMAP is almost like a reasonable assurance plan to address the TMDL impairment.
Yeah, because on our smaller water bodies, we do reasonable assurance plans prior to a TMDL. So it's like if you do the reasonable assurance plan, you're trying to head off the TMDL. So that's where it's.
These are the individual TMDLs for those WIBIDs. Because the 1621G, the lower Alafaya River, that's basically the endpoint of the entire watershed. So how those percent reductions are prescribed to that watershed, it's still not clear. And that's sort of the clarity that we're trying to get from the department.
Yeah, I just saw the note from that. Yes, I mean, in the department has developed alternative restoration plans, and there's basically two types. The 4B, which is what we're talking about here, reasonable assurance plans, but there's also a 4E. And that is what I would suggest if anybody has a TMDL up in one of the tributary WIBIDs, that you consider doing a 4E plan. And that gets you credit for any kind of work that you've already done.
Just shown now.
That's still considered a BMAP, or is that a different type of a plan?
It's an alternative restoration plan.
It's usually a lot smaller. So my understanding is BMAPs are like for big, like river systems versus a creek would be more of a 4E.
Not really.
Okay, sorry.
So have maps on the screen from the actual BMAP updates. This is the Manatee River. The specific TMDLs that this BMAP is addressing are identified with the numbers. So it's not the entire portion of the river, but how the RA allocations for basically the remainder of lower Tampa Bay, which is inclusive of the Manatee River drainage, how that, meshes with these individual WIBIDs and the TMDLs there. That's sort of the outstanding question we've asked the department.
Well, it sounds like based on what Tony just said, I imagine the department would confirm that they're really separate. They're separate lines of action that is done. That you could be Lower Tampa Bay, could be green across the board our seagrass could look really good. But the tributaries may not look so great. Those are two separate things, right? I mean, that's the way it is currently. Because to Tony's comment, the RA plan was never designed to address the impairment in the tributaries. And I think that's still the case. I'm not sure. So has something changed to change that status quo?
I think the point of view you just expressed is the
Yeah.
one we shared.
The one I just, like, based on what Tony said, I mean, that's always been the construct, is that the RA plan addresses the bay in a holistic approach, not the individual widgets up in the tributaries. That's what TMDL that theory does. So they're separate.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we're trying to understand from the department's point of view how those two link with one another.
And
We don't want to duplicate effort.
Yeah.
If there's things that can be done in the smaller widget that translates to meeting an allocation for the larger RA plan, we're all for that. We want to see that sort of happen. But you can't go from the reasonable assurance plan and say meeting that is meeting the smaller team deals. And I think that's the way the BMAPs are structured right now. And that's the concern I expressed.
Yeah, I gotcha. So it's really just more of a, we want confirmation that they understand.
Yeah.
What we're saying. Okay, gotcha.
Anyone else? Do we have any other topics that we want to talk about?
Definitely need to set the next meeting date, and if you all have, we would like to be responsive to all of the portions of Tampa Bay, so if there are other issues or presentations that you'd like to see at future meetings, it would be helpful if you let me know. We have a few meeting options included in the agenda for August. You could let me know which one might work best for you all. The 18th, the 20th, the 22nd, or the 29th. I'll have to check to make sure the room is available. If you have a preference, let me know.
August.
August.
These are in the morning, this will be morning?
It could be whichever,
Okay.
if you have if you prefer the afternoon, we can do that. And the goal is when we will also share the decision memo requesting input from the department and EPA on the questions that posed for the Old Tampa Bay study. So we're gonna request that they can respond by that time too. So while we have them here, hopefully they'll be able to answer those questions as well.
I mentioned the Herb and Sam, we'd also probably like to have conversation about Piney Point, the new permit limits that have been developed for Piney Point. Those need to be formalized as official allocation recommendation for Lower Tampa Bay too. So we'd probably ask the department of Piney Point to present information on that as well at the August meeting. Then if you go back to your Wayback Machine, sort of other outstanding questions that have been out there for all the base segments is, you know, the history and changes that have happened since the allocations were first developed in 2009. Both jurisdictions have changed as well as land use. We know that has affected, you know, loadings and fine allocations in each of the major base segments. Kind of had that out there as an outstanding question that we handled through the regional insurance updates. But we, you know, it hasn't been a topic that we necessarily want to address. But that, again, is still something that has been out there going back all the way to the 2017 regional insurance update. We recognize sort of this drift of what's occurring within the watershed versus what we're actually observing in terms of loading. Just fairly confused you all some more on that. These are conversations we've had as well as body, and they didn't at the time be developed into a specific decision memo that we get the department's feedback on how to move forward. But if those are still pressing questions of the consortium, those are the things we need to address this reasonable assurance update, which we only have now, what, a year and a half left, basically, through the end of 2026.
So that discussion, Ed, be limited to just 2009 timeframe, land use, how that relates to what was built into the waste load allocations at that time versus what the land use is like today.
Right.
And then are we making decisions in this meeting about where to go there from there, or?
Well, as we traditionally do in the reasonable assurance plan updates, we recognize the allocations that were developed. If there's a need to update any of those allocations, that's the opportunity to do it through this reasonable assurance plan update. I'm not saying that we need to go there, but that's where that conversation takes place, especially if we've seen drift in terms of jurisdictional extent as well as land use changes that might be affecting loadings.
Since we dictate that we have.
And like I said, we've had conversations, I think Bray and Tony, and during prior RA cycles have shown sort of the difference in estimated loading, based on the changes through like 2017 was the last, I think, timeframe update.
Right.
And we know there have been more changes since then, and there's now a 2023 land use that's available.
So certainly we won't be making decisions at the August meeting, but we're kind of coming into that time window of if these are changes that we need to sort of work through to incorporate in the RA update, we need to start sort of working those conversations through the process. You all need to provide direction about how much you want to touch and how much you don't.
And in our sort of review, that decision memo that you all just passed and conversations that we've had with Jan, you know, the department's approach, depending on the questions that we just asked them, might be, you know, what you define the reasonable assurance plan is adequate moving forward, and no changes to water quality standards need to be done. I don't know. That might be a response from the department. We don't know. That's why we're asking those questions. And if that's the case, you know, we continue to work under this awful one for all spirit as part of this regional plan. That's our plan moving forward, and it's our you know, those are the benchmarks that we've set up for ourselves to meet water quality standards for those base segments in the future. So, yeah, go ahead, Janet.
If I could.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to impress, that this meeting that you're trying to identify the date would have the DEP people here, hopefully, or virtually, however they are going to attend, to address those questions that are in that December, that decision document that we didn't really discuss here today, but that, you know, that input is critical for the program and the NMC to discuss.
Yeah, I think, yeah, as Maya mentioned, our hope is that we're providing them enough time to formulate an opinion and a response back to those 7 questions, and that'll be in enough time to kind of talk through that at the August meeting.
So you would just, from an old time, you'd probably have a much longer meeting, given the subject matter that you have identified. Yeah.
Certainly won't be as quick as this one is. The shot. That's all I got.
I didn't hear a date.
18th, 20th, 22nd, or 29th of August.
20th.
That work for folks?
What day of the week is that?
Great question.
Wednesday.
I will prioritize the 20th, so long as the room is available. And I'll send out a notice letting y'all. What to do with this. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Amazing.
That's it.
What? How's the family? Good?
Yes, and that's the session. That's one of the centers.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to DC today.
That's how she doing.
I mean, just like full time on the vet. They're actually sending them all
Emails back
Yes,
and
sir.
forth.
Myself.
This.